everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to artists from all walks of life to discuss their personal and professional journeys that led them to where they are today. I'm your host, Graham Waldrop. No one's riding shotgun with me this week. This is a solo interview that we conducted for the first time in the history of the show with Andrew Diatroptoff, who is the writer of the game The Lost and the Wicked, which is now available on Steam. We met Andrew at GDC earlier this year, and thought it would be really cool to get a writer on the show. We've talked to programmers, we've talked to artists, we talked to a producer, but we have yet to talk to a writer on a game. And it was really cool exploring the differences between writing novels, screenplays, things like that, versus writing for a video game, and sort of the challenge that poses for someone like Andrew, who's not really an avid gamer, who's never written on a game before, but was able to do that, come into this game and create a really cool story for The Lost and the Wicked. The Lost and the Wicked is a brutal twin-stick psycho thriller with unique visuals, a kick-ass original soundtrack, and a compelling story with hectic gameplay. If you've played Hotline Miami or Binding of Isaac, it shares a lot of similarities with those games. The art style in particular shares a lot of similarities with Hotline Miami in terms of how crude it is in the best way possible. So it was really cool exploring that game with Andrew and talking about what it's like to write on a game. And being a writer myself, it was really cool to talk about the creative process there with Andrew. Hopefully it's not too pretentious, two writers waxing poetic about their favorite writers and talking about what works in story and what doesn't, and how to create a compelling narrative. So hopefully you enjoy this, and let's get right to the interview. This is a wild game that you have, that you guys have created. The Lost and the Wicked. I remember walking the GDC show floor and see all these games. I see like the games made by the folks from Sweden, and they're very bright and colorful 3D games. Some are 2D games. And then I'm walking around a little bit more, and then I spot this crazy looking art style that immediately made me think of Hotline Miami, and stopped by, and that's how I met you, Andrew. It was really cool meeting you and playing your game. And the art style is just like, and it sucks that a podcast, at least our podcast, is completely an auditory medium, because I would love for the people to be able to see what I'm talking about right now. But it was just so, they got this. It's a really cool twin stick shooter, just with this very graphic, very crude in a good way art style. Just immediately grabbed me and made me want to play the game. So I was really happy to meet you and talk to you and talk to your team about the game and have you on the show. So welcome aboard officially. And here you are after all the audio trouble we went through to get you get you set up.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah. I mean, that GDC experience was great. And, meeting you and checking out Mudstack and everything was pretty awesome. I think what you guys are doing is really exciting and cool. And I think it's going to be a really productive app for a lot of people, because game development can be messy, and the more structure that you have to it, the better. So yeah. Well, thank you. We're hoping to be a valuable asset to anyone who wants to try and work with us in that respect. I'm curious too, because when we talked, you said you were the writer of the game, and you don't meet a lot of, at least for us, we don't meet a lot of people who actually write on games. Mm-hmm. And my background is in writing and producing on a film level, independent film and TV, and some music as well. And so I'm always interested to talk with other writers, but I haven't really met a lot of other video game writers. Not to say when I did work in the industry, I never really wrote anything. But I think that has to be a really fascinating process, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But I kind of want to learn more about sort of where you came from, how you got into the industry, and sort of what makes you tick. Yeah, well, it's kind of a funny story, because I have never been an immensely avid gamer. Like, I played a lot of the legacy titles, but I really hadn't jumped in too much with the indie game scene. And as we all know, COVID kind of upturned everybody's lives and their lifestyles, and all the commitments that they made to people, that they planned to see in that year and a half or so had to be kind of shelved. But my buddy
Zach, who composed the music for the game, he left a internship that he had in Monterey, and he came up and hung out with me in Sacramento for a bit. We were wearing masks and everything, of course. But he was telling me and showing me this game that he made with our now developer, Isaac, and it was essentially this art style, and it was just awesome. Immediately, like you said, when you walked through GDC and you saw how striking it was, that was the same exact reaction I had was, this is so grungy and cool and interesting. And he was working on the music then, and as the weeks went by, when we'd keep hanging out, we eventually ended up living with each other at a place in downtown Sac. We got a place together, but throughout that process, you become tight with the people, especially because of COVID, you become tight with the people that are in your immediate circle. And I got more exposure to the game, and I started questioning, and I was like, is there a plot line here? Like, is there a storyline? And he was like, no, it's you kind of like go through the levels and you fight the monsters and you fight the big monster. And that was essentially it. And I was like, well, I think this is really, really cool. Like, I love this idea. Like, what if, there was a bit of a narrative structure to it? And so I kind of pitched the concept, and Isaac really liked it, and Zach really liked it. And so then I jumped up on the team, and that's how I got into game development, honestly, narrative development.
Cool. So this was like your first real experience then in game development.
This is my first real experience.
Awesome. So is it just the three of you making the game?
Yes.
Wow.
Just the three of us.
And who's the overall kind of creative lead, would you say? That's kind of like makes the final decision on everything.
I would say Isaac. He birthed it probably, I would say, 4 or 5 years ago or so.
Okay. So were they pretty far along in development when you hopped on? Like, was it what stage of development was it in when you were first exposed to the game?
It had, I think, like the first 2 or 3 levels.
Okay.
And then we had brainstorming sessions where we decide what the monsters looked like or whatever the case was.
Right, but the mechanics and the art style, it sounds like, was kind of figured out at this point.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. The art style was purely Isaac.
Yeah, and from what I know about how, it sort of depends on what studio or what team, but it seems like, story is sort of shaped around design, shaped around what's going on with the mechanics, as opposed to the other way around, where kind of a story is laid out and the mechanics are built around it. So, it sounds like to me you kind of entered as a writer in a way that many writers probably enter a game's development. Maybe a little later on than most writers, but definitely like, hey, we've kind of figured out the feel, the function of how everything's going to work in this world that we're building.
Yeah, no, entirely. The whole graphic concept was there, and then it was just a matter of having the narrative arc and the building blocks to have a enticing structure.
Cool. So, as a writer, how'd you get the writing bug?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think, I don't know if you ever read John Green, but I remember he had a quote one time where he was like, when I was younger, I used to think that like writers were like astronauts. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like there's just this whole other realm of a vocation. And so I read a lot when I was younger. I still read all the time. And I read the classics when I was younger, and, it was just this medium that was really cool and fascinating. And, I was a philosophy major and a history minor, and those take a lot of writing, but it's good writing, and it makes you a better writer. More writing is always good for better writing.
So were you more interested in kind of, your passion of reading fueled your passion for writing, it sounds like. So were you more into writing sort of short stories, novels, or did you want to get into more of the visual medium, screenplays, stage plays, things like that?
I think where it started kind of was like journaling, and then as you like start to journal, when I was in my teens, like you start to like, oh well, I'll just write a little story, and then you kind of branch out from there. And
sort of based on fact, what's going on in your life.
Right, exactly. And then eventually like, well, what if I play around with this idea? And especially philosophy, I'd say in particular, kind of, a lot of books are conceptually trying to say something, and it's just in a story format, right? Movies, etc. So, I'm actually trying to write a book right now. I've been working on it for like 3 years, and that's like my first fiction attempt. But I think just the medium itself is fascinating. I think it's the structure of thought and portraying ideas,
Like after the novel's done, kind of what you want to work on next, or is it sort of like you're just trying to get this novel done? That's what you're focused on.
Yeah. Well, I'd say I'm trying to get this book done. But afterwards, I do want to get into screenplays and screenwriting.
Oh, cool. Is that a short or a feature?
I wrote a screenplay for a short film that I'd like to try to shoot sometime in the next year or so. We'll see how it goes.
Can you tell us what that's about?
It's, I think it's definitely going to be about social media, in a kind of a cultish manner, and it'll be talking about or portraying kind of depictions of like worship and building altars out of false prophets, etc., stuff like that.
So like social media influencers and people like that.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And tying it in with a kind of a religious aspect.
Cool. And I think that, one of the great things about taking that approach with it too is that from a budgetary standpoint, not to put my producer's hat on right now, but if it's just, if social media is the main crux of it, you don't have to get too fancy about going to all these different locations or setting in a specific time period or anything like that. It's like that can be pretty contained. Right. But if you do it right, it can still be interesting. It's like a practical way of approaching trying to make a short film. You'd be surprised the amount of people that try to do all this crazy shit, trying to make, we're going to make a Civil War short film that's going to, cost us $50,000 or something. It's like, wait, no, that's just stupid, right? So,
yeah. Exactly.
So, sounds like you're taking the right approach on that.
Well, I think also, so much of it, as at least, because I've read screenplays, I've listened to a lot of podcasts, I've read a lot of books in general, and just it always comes down to the writing, at least when you look at a movie. It seems that way, at least, is like, obviously it's the directors and the producers and everything, but if the writing is strong enough, everything else is going to come out of it, I think.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. I mean, I think one of the things that's really fascinating to watch is watching an actor. For example, like if you watch, this is not to shit on a lot of the Marvel movies, but you watch something like the Captain America movies, which aren't like badly written films or anything, but you watch an actress like Scarlett Johansson in that, and then she does a fine job what she's given, but it's not like a amazing performance or anything as Black Widow. Or anything, but then you watch Marriage Story with her and Adam Driver, and she just turns it up a notch, man. Proves that she's like a really phenomenal actor. But I think also, if the screenplay wasn't as strong, the director's name escapes my mind at the moment, but if the screenplay wasn't as strong, Baumbach, Noah Baumbach, then what are you left with, right? Mm-hmm. Like the actor is only as good as the screenplay. Obviously, different calibers of actor, but like, a good script, you're exactly right, is the foundation of what can be a great film.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that probably it has an actor can be incredibly talented, but they're only as talented as the writing is letting them be, probably. I think it's probably hard for actors to really soup up a bad script.
Yeah, I mean, they'll try their damnedest for sure, but
they'll try their damnedest, definitely.
Yeah,
but in the end, it's about the writing. So that's something that's really cool for me because, I can write this novel and then I can also, work on the short film and then work on other conceptual ideas for screenplays and everything, and just have an understanding. And I would say the philosophy helped quite a bit in having that understanding of filling in an idea with a narrative structure. You know? Like trying to really not push a concept, but you're trying to say something. Yeah. Right? Like if you're putting it out in the world, it's not just like, oh, these two guys get a coffee and then they have a bagel, then they go home. It's like, no, there's something that you're trying to express And there's a concept that's you're trying to help, not help, but you're trying to depict to people to understand where you're coming from and maybe how you see the world, or, you want to challenge this theory, etc. And so I think that, the philosophy really helped in filling out and how to fill out that kind of that chunk that you have, that period that you have, where you can fill it with dialogue and you can fill it with a sense of something. And that's what's so cool about writing, and that's what's so cool about the medium, is just that if you do it correctly and effectively, it can be extremely powerful.
Yeah, and I think too the philosophy major must help a lot too, because there's a lot of different perspective in philosophy.
Right.
And you get a lot of different perspective, that breeds conflict.
Right.
Which is obviously the crux of dramatic writing.
Yeah,
so that's got to be like you said, that's got to be a huge influence on what you're doing too. It makes you more well-rounded as a writer to bring different perspectives. Because I think one of the things that bugs me when I read anyone's script, sometimes it happens in stuff I work on, is characters sound the same. Characters,
yes.
like you could interchange dialogue between
right.
characters, and you'd be like, oh yeah, it's like the characters don't have an independent voice, a unique voice, and that always drives me crazy when someone brings me a script. I'm like, that character could have said that. Like, that shouldn't be the case.
I know that Aaron Sorkin talks about it, how he's very animated when he writes, right? Because he's playing out all these different characters and he's trying to, through the writing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's playing out the movie in his head. And through the writing, he's trying to have that portrayed. I think that's how you really have to do it, is you have to be tenacious about trying to get those characters on the mark, trying to get for a modern term, like the vibe of them that comes off the page. And that takes a lot of empathy, in a sense. You have to be empathetic to all different types. You can't just write your life story through all of these different characters that have the same tone. It's like you have to sit in somebody else's shoes and really take on their perspective on how they would see the world and how they would react to something in the scene, or react to something, in the film or the novel or et cetera.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I find fascinating is the different constraints when you're writing for different mediums, right? Like, screenplay, totally different than writing a novel.
Yeah.
And I imagine, writing a game is sort of like, could be a cross almost between novel writing and film in a way. You're dealing with a visual medium, but you're dealing with it in a very different way than you would deal with a film. I feel like, especially with y'all's game, there isn't, like, from what I could tell, there wasn't voice acting really.
Mm-hmm.
The characters aren't talking to each other in the sense that they would talk in the same way that they would talk in a film, or even in a novel. And you're sort of constructing the narrative, it seemed like, from a third person perspective, right? In the video game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So take me through, like, the differences and challenges of being like, all right, I have this kind of knowledge base of film and novelization, but going in to write a game, what kind of constraints are placed upon you as a writer? What strictures are imposed?
Well, it was interesting because it was quite the adaptive process. Like, I really had to lean on Zach, the music composer, who probably is the most avid gamer out of all of us, to really understand the rhythm of how it'll be portrayed in a game. So whatever we wrote, like, I would write something and then it would be like, well, maybe it's fine writing, but it wouldn't work very well in the game because it's not direct enough, Mm-hmm. And so then you're slowly but surely kind of chiseling your way to find the balance between directness and still evoking some sort of emotion, or trying to color in a character.
How do you write around an already built level?
You take the elements that make the level interesting visually, but also just kind of tonally, and then you kind of infuse them into a sort of dialogue, and you also really adapt as we were talking about before, you really adapt your, what would you call this, script, I guess,
mm-hmm.
to the level format, and that's essentially, when you're playing through it, you're like, okay, here there should be dialogue, here there should be dialogue, here there should be dialogue. So you're kind of working within the constraints of having a few particular moments to be able to infuse that arc of the story in there.
Right. And what about like levels that were created as you were writing? Or was that a thing that happened?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, you're kind of adapting on the fly because like Isaac would have an idea for some really cool graphic thing. And I was like, okay, well, I wasn't working on writing anything like that, but I'll just add it, somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add it so that it makes sense.
Yeah. So it's like he would have the idea for the level and then you'd be like, okay, I'm going to write based off that.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
And make it all make sense within the narrative structure.
Right. So one of the things I think that was interesting about how Hotline Miami did it, and I hate to keep using that as a comparison, but that's just what it reminded me of.
No, it's a great game.
Your game, yeah. As for those that aren't familiar, if you play this Hitman, you go to all these different places and kill all these gangsters, but eventually, and each level is really tough and brutal, and it's very visceral. But after a while, it becomes sort of a thing where you start to realize you're sort of getting played by these weird people in masks and, but the gameplay isn't really interrupted that much. Like when you're playing a level, you're playing a level and then it's not like there's a lot of dialogue unless there's a boss that comes in or there's downtime between levels. But I always found like that game had a really good balance of like introducing narrative kernels as each level goes along, sort of starts making you question the reality of the character that you're playing as. But it keeps you really invested in the gameplay. And I always think that, some games now, the really big cinematic games, can sometimes rely too much on the cinematic flair. And as much as I like that, but I always come back to is like gameplay is king. But if the story can support the gameplay, then that's when you really win. So I always felt like Hotline Miami did a great job balancing narrative and story and kind of infusing it into one, but not letting the narrative get in the way of the gameplay. I feel like it was a burden to have to go through the story. What was the challenge like for you to make sure that the gameplay and the narrative kind of coalesced?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example. That's always the game that we're compared to, and I think they do a fantastic job of, like you were saying, giving those kernels. I think it's very similar. Is that you're just trying to give enough to push the story along and build the intrigue as you go throughout the levels. Now, I think that, we definitely wanted to, and that was the big moment of writing for me in this game, was writing those cutscenes that we'd have in the game where, it would be a flashback or it would be, some sort of memory or realization that needed to be realized to the player. And so that's an opportunity to really kind of fill in the gaps in a sense. I guess that's the way you're kind of looking at it, is you're looking at the entire thing as a big gap that you're trying to fill into in order to get to the end point, which is the final part of the story, And so, you just keep pushing it along, and then you have like this big moment of dialogue, and then it just keeps pushing along again. And I always like when, like Hotline Miami or, a lot of movies or anything, but like when there's just this one part of dialogue that completely shifts your perspective on what you're actually seeing, And so I think that we really tried to do that and have this kind of slow burning effect before it eventually kind of, gets really big and interesting and dramatic.
Cool. Yeah, because I think that's like the thing that could get lost, right, is a narrative in a game like that is so gameplay heavy. So yeah, I'm interested in actually playing through the full game and seeing like, okay, how is the narrative interwoven?
Yeah.
Are you telling the truth or are you full of shit, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, I think The Binding of Isaac is also a great example because I still, I personally, I just believe that people need stories, It's like that Jim Ditty, and we tell ourselves stories in order to live. Like, I believe that wholeheartedly, and I think that, I think that an enticing idea is just enough to really I think it's enough to really provide this color to a game that, it would never have if it didn't have that storyline and it didn't have that interesting thing that it's trying to tackle.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to be able to use the medium and explore interesting concepts like that,
So who are some of your favorite writers or influences on you in your writing?
Yeah. I really love John Updike as like a novelist. Really big fan of John Updike. I like Hemingway. I don't know if you heard this modern writer, Sally Rooney.
Mm-mm.
She's really good. She wrote Normal People and Conversations with Friends. She's like an Irish writer.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Hemingway in particular. I think, especially his short stories, they're just great.
Yeah, he's really was a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hemingway is fantastic. I've actually been reading F. Scott Fitzgerald. He had his personal essays called The Crack Up, and it kind of like shows his descent with his alcoholism, and it's really.
I never heard of that. That's cool.
Yeah,
I have to check that out.
It's really interesting. And then also I've been reading David Foster Wallace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Anything on the screenwriting side? Any screenwriters?
Yeah, I mean Robert Towns.
Yeah. What's it? Chinatown. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's see who else. You know who else? What's his name? Taylor Sheridan.
Yeah. He's really come on strong. Like Hell or High Water, I think, is a wonderful film. I mean, wonderful might not be the best descriptor for it, but I freaking love that movie, man. Like Chris Pine's best performance
by far.
Jeff Bridges is out of this world in it. That's just a good old fashioned movie right there.
Exactly. Yeah. It feels like exactly what you want it to when you go into it.
Yeah, good characterization. Like it's two different sides of the law, but you spend like equal amount of time with these two partners and learn about their quirks, and then they collide by the end of it. Yeah, if anyone hasn't seen that, it's on Netflix. Everyone has Netflix. Watch it. It's a great movie.
No, it's fantastic. Wind River is also a really good one that he wrote.
Wind River was cool.
Yeah, Wind River was sick. I like how he writes westerns, but he also has a very modern sensibility about them, which I think is really sick.
Yeah, all his characters feel fully realized.
For sure.
Yeah, Sicario,
yeah. That's a fantastic movie. Yeah, that one. Let's see, somebody else. I mean, Aaron Sorkin, obviously.
Sorkin's always kind of bugged me a little bit.
You think so?
I think he's a great writer. I mean, I'll never come close to like carrying Aaron Sorkin's jockstrap. But the thing that kind of bugs me about his writing style is I feel like his dialogue is so good. It's like no one talks like that.
Yeah,
and you kind of have to suspend your disbelief. Like real people don't talk like that. But it's great writing at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, he's interesting because, it's very much this idealistic idea of how you can talk and interact with people, and it's always this optimistic sense, at least from what I see. At least, when you watch The West Wing, for instance, like it's a very, very optimistic look at politics and the people that are involved in it, and the writing and the dialogue and the speech is so clean and perfect and everybody is witty.
Yeah, everyone knows exactly what to say at the perfect time.
Exactly.
It feels like, yeah.
Exactly. And so, I agree. It is a very kind of sanitized way of looking at, or kind of watching a movie and feeling the dialogue.
Yeah, but, I love a lot of his stuff. Like, I mean, Social Network to me is one of the better screenplays you can read.
Absolutely. I mean, that movie's phenomenal.
It's a great film.
It's going to be it's going to be a relic, probably. Just of a time, especially because it was written, 4 years after Facebook was public, right?
Yeah, I think it came out in 2010. The book came out, I think, a couple years after, 3 or 4 years after Facebook launched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not even, it's before, the whole social media politics craze of now, so it's an interesting look at that period in time. And
it's almost like a period piece at this point.
Yeah, exactly. I think it really will be a relic for people to watch and be like, huh, okay, interesting. Like,
yeah,
that's not how we see social media now,
Right.
Yeah. What about you? What kind of screenwriters do you like?
I've always been a huge fan of the three Davids, I call them. David Chase, who created The Sopranos, a huge influence on my writing and the way I write characters. David Simon created The Wire.
Yep.
I just think the way he portrays characters also is just like everyone's just you feel like you're watching like a documentary. Like Sopranos is very funny. It's like dark comedy mixed with drama. Sure. But The Wire feels like you're watching a documentary. And I feel like his writing in other shows like Treme, Generation Kill, We Own the City just came out. It's like all his stuff feels like this is exactly how people talk. I've just never seen characters realize like that on screen before. And and the way he can write for anybody, he can write for black people, white people, gay people, lesbian, doesn't matter like what nationality is. It's like or denomination or sexual orientation. It's like he just treats everybody like a character, and he does it in a way that's so captivating. He's great, and I like David Milch a lot, especially for Deadwood. Even though that's
I never watched that one.
Yeah, it's really good. It's like Shakespeare in the Old West. It's like it's kind of like he reminds me of Sorkin in the sense that his style is very stylized, but you really have to I have to watch it sometimes with subtitles on because everybody is also like really eloquent, but they're also talking like they're in the 1870s, and so it's like you really just gotta pay attention so in depth with how he writes his characters. But yeah, those guys I like a lot. I love Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola.
For sure.
I think his run of films in the 70s, Godfather, Godfather 2, The Conversation, and Apocalypse Now. I don't think anyone has a better run of films, 4-film run. Like, I have some friends, some film friends always get in the argument over who's the best director, modern like living director. Is it Scorsese or Spielberg? And I'm like, Coppola beat the hell out of them in the 70s, and that's when everybody was at the top of their game. So I'll take Coppola, man.
Yeah, and that run is incredible. I mean, The Conversation is unbelievable. If one director had that as like their pinnacle film, they'd still be considered pretty brilliant. That's in the run of The Godfather 1, 2, and Apocalypse Now. That's incredible.
What's crazy is that Conversation and Godfather 2 came out in the same year. It's like, how do you do that?
Did they really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. So
that's insane.
Yeah, Coppola's always a guy I go back to. There's definitely others I'm forgetting, but like those guys always stand out to me as people I'm really really inspired by.
Yeah, definitely. Paul Schrader.
Like Paul Schrader a lot. Raging Bull, Taxi Driver. Even his new film. I didn't see his newest one, but I liked. Oh God, I can't remember the name of it.
Is it the one with Ethan Hawke?
The one with Ethan Hawke where he plays the priest.
First Reformed?
First Reformed, yeah. That was really good.
That's a really good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me more about like, I'm sure you got like sort of a cadence at some point when I'm sure like your feet were getting wet initially, but then you guys started to work pretty well together, I would imagine, or else the game would have never been finished.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that's what's so cool about it is that, we worked so well together. And we created this kind of synergy where, we'd meet up like 3 times a week and talk about what we were working on and having our goals for, the next couple of days and staying productive and talking about concepts, etc. And, we all started to really like each other.
That goes a long way.
Yeah, it goes a really long way. When you have chemistry with people that you're working with, borderline, that's everything. Because if you don't have that, it's going to be hell to be efficient and, have efficacy in whatever you're trying to do. So, luckily we ended up really liking each other and being proud of what we made. So that was really cool. And, that kind of segues into our venture with the weed, actually.
You mentioned that over email, but yeah, tell the listeners what your your plans are for that.
Yeah, so we started a company called Buddy, and the idea with Buddy is we want to make specific experiences for specific games. So our whole idea is that we want to have specific strains of weed for specific video games. And we want the strains to be curated to fit the sensibilities of the game. And
not just from a packaging standpoint, but from the actual like experience you would have on it, I would assume.
Yeah. So from the packaging standpoint, it would be called the game, whatever game we'd work with, and then the edible that you would have, which would be the cannabis, would be grown to feel a certain way, essentially.
Cool. So, like, what were you guys in the process of getting that off the ground, or is it off the ground?
We're off the ground. We're trying to secure some investments right now. We're still in the process of that. And it's been interesting because what kind of spurned the idea was that we had a strain of weed for our Lost in the Wicked game, and we just used it as kind of a marketing idea where it was like, well, we can get the word out there for the game and have it be a strain of weed, and what happened at GDC was all these people were very curious about how the two were correlated, right? Where it's like, well, so do you smoke the weed and play the game? And we're like, well, I guess you could, but you don't have to, right? And it's like, whatever, you kind of...
You're forced to smoke the weed. You're forced to take the edible. You have no choice in it, regardless of age or the legal ramifications of where you are. If you're not in California or Colorado, you have to smoke this shit.
in order to really... but that was, kind of this idea or question we kept getting more and more. And it was like, whoa, maybe there's something there with that. And also the fact that the farm that we ended up collaborating with on the strain of weed, it ended up being one of their most successful strains. And so that was like, oh, that's interesting, and I think that part of it, getting back to story, is that I think that the labeling kind of had a call to action that I think a lot of weed marketing doesn't have as much. And so, it's still selling off the shelves and everything. And so we decided, oh, well, why don't we just take this idea and make our own company and make this whole idea.
Have you reached out to other developers so far? What's the reception been like to this idea?
We've kind of broached the topic a bit with a couple, and I think it's been pretty responsive for the most part. I'm sure there will be some at some point that will reject the idea because they don't want to be associated with that, and that's fine, Mm-hmm. But we kind of want to be almost like a record label in a sense, where we just find games that we really dig and really believe in, and just reach out and be like, hey, listen, like, we'd really love to have you be a part of our Buddy roster, and we're going to have an app that'll have like a kind of social feed where people can talk about topics, et cetera, that's related to Buddy products or whatever the hell they want to talk about. And we're kind of trying to create I hesitate to say community, but I think more of a fan base and a brand that's really comfortable and easy to access for video game players and people that, might be a bit apprehensive about trying edibles and getting involved in, consuming some cannabis products.
Circling back to the game, how long was development for you guys? Did it start during COVID or pre-COVID?
It started
like your involvement in it, at least.
Yeah, it was during COVID.
And so that was all remote work, right?
It was all remote work. Yeah, I mean, we met up a few times. Everybody tested and everything,
Right.
But yeah, I was involved for about a year and a half.
And then how much rewriting did you have to do?
Oh,
like when you submit your stuff, like, right, and then it's like, I imagine you get feedback, but like, did something come up in development where it was like, all right, jettison this idea because I had to redesign the level or something. Because I know like one of the issues apparently that Tim Levine, who's creator of BioShock, with his new company, has been like he will have an idea, and he's also kind of like the creative director of everything, and then his team will go off and build all this stuff, all these assets, these levels, and then he'll scrap it and start over. So it could be really stressful on the developers one if story changes, but it sounds like it was the other way around for you in the sense where it's like the game is already established, you know what you're doing. But did you have to like rewrite a lot because levels were changing or aesthetic was changing or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at times for sure, at times it was definitely a matter of kind of taking the pitch and being like, okay, I guess we're going to write this differently this way because, we did have some new idea that we wanted to put visually, and so you're really trying to write to a visual that almost already exists, and there were times where you'd write and we would or Isaac would come up with a visual for what we'd written, where the graphic idea was created, and then it was like, okay, well then I'm going to write to this, and then it's like, now we're going to scrap that idea completely because you're just trying to make the story all make sense and everything.
Were there any like particular ideas that you had that you hated to lose?
Yes, there was one. I would say like the last part of the game, I really wanted to put a scene in, and it just didn't work out in the end. There were a couple different like extensions of cutscenes that we really wanted to fit in, but it just didn't work out for what we were trying to do, which was a bit of a bummer, but that's okay. That's what happens. That's part of the creative process. So,
yeah, I find it fascinating that game development is all about iteration, but I think that applies to writing as well. Obviously, writing for games like that's intertwined at that point, but writing is iteration. First draft's never the final draft. Neither is the second or the third. So I think like marrying those two together must be crazy.
Absolutely. And, I think it has so much to do with the team that you work with, and you have to be simpatico on what you're trying to do, because it becomes very apparent when there's a misunderstanding as to what the ultimate conclusion is of that iteration.
Like, where do we go from here? Like, have we made progress or are we regressing?
Yeah, exactly. And, it's more frustrating when you think you're on the same page and then you're working on something and you realize that's not what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
Like we're completely misaligned into where we actually wanted to go or where we thought we wanted to go.
I think as long as like that's corrected, that's fine. But if that keeps happening, then it just gets really frustrating.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And, I think so much of that is just a matter of being honest with people.
Yeah, because if you hold that in, the criticism or whatever, then it just like...
It's going to come out in different ways.
It's going to come out in different ways, and then you're not going to get what you want by the end of the game either.
And if everybody on the team understands, like, we're in this together, like we're a team, like we are trying to finish something, we're trying to finish a goal, but you need to have, thick skin about the fact that you could be doing something wrong and everybody else could know what needs to be done, and they're going to tell you what needs to be done, right? And you have to take it and not get too upset about it. And you just have to take it and put it into your goodie bag of how you finish your tasks.
And you guys didn't have a producer on this game either, in terms of like...
No.
So that's really fascinating to me that like everybody was kind of just accountable and got their shit done, and you're able to make it that happen. Because like, even with like a small team, things can spiral if people aren't getting their stuff done on time.
For sure.
Or stuff done in a way where it's like, even if it's not done on time, it's like you can see the progress being made.
Again, it just goes back to having that team and having those people. It's so important to create relationships that are, at least from my end, like it helps so much to have relationships that are just outside of work also, like just a bit, just so that you understand those other sides of people, because then you can really kind of relate to them so that when you talk to them and give them, or they give you some sort of feedback on something, they know where you're coming from, because you're able to relate to them in a way that's more personal, so that like when you have a constructive criticism or something, it's not seen as like this huge swipe, because you build trust through your mutual sharings of.
Yeah, you're aligned at that point.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly important.
So was it like independently financed, or what was that situation like?
Yeah, I mean, it was independently financed. It was really, it was independently financed.
Right on. So did you guys do this like full time, or do you have daytime jobs as well and just worked on this in your off hours, or?
Yeah. So Isaac's a software engineer. I'm in actually a real estate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm in real estate, and Zach works for a restaurant in Sacramento.
Well, that's inspiring that you guys were able to like complete development on this and get it out. Yeah, you're not the first guest we've had on here that hasn't, or that has gotten something like what they're working on published. But in terms of the folks we met at GDC, you guys are the first team to like, all right, our game is out. It is there. It's on the Steam store. Take us through that whole process of getting onto Steam, the marketing, that whole machine.
It's hard with Steam because, like, okay, so you try to plan out a day that you want to release it, right? So then you look at the games that are being released and you go, okay, when's the best time? When's the best opportunity for us to, one, be released, and two, get onto the page storefront? Because that's essentially how your game lives or dies, right? And so a lot of times, like we had like probably 2,000 plus wish lists on the game before we released it. And so, we really thought that, oh, well, this is really good. We can go up against all these other games that have similar or a similar amount of wish lists or less wish lists, and we can.
So how'd you get on those wish lists?
Well, people wish list our game.
Basically, how are you getting your game out there to the point where people were putting you on their wish list?
Oh, so like Twitter, and having a trailer and everything to kind of push out on YouTube and whatnot. But we really push Twitter quite a bit because I think there's a good conversation that's always happening with indie games on there. And so, yeah, but you're really trying to push for that window of like 20 to 25 minutes where everything works out, where you get enough sales and then you get pushed to the front of the main page, right? Mm-hmm. And that's essentially how games live or die on Steam.
And you guys made it up there?
We did okay there. Yeah, we got on there for a bit, and then eventually, there's how many games are released on Steam a day? I don't know, 300, 400.
Yeah.
So that's crazy. So you get that little window of time, and that's good and everything. But then eventually you're really riding a lot of the steam of hype at that point. Right.
And is the game done pretty well so far?
We've done okay. But, we're really excited about partnering with Top Hat Studios in New York. We signed a contract with them, and it's going to be on the PS Marketplace, and I always say that, the Switch and and Xbox, and then they're doing all the marketing and everything for it. So,
oh, great! So how'd you get in touch with them?
Actually, GDC.
Oh, really?
Yep. I was talking to one of the guys there pretty often. I kept running into him, and he kept coming to the booth and gave us his card and everything. And then he reached out to us, I think, a couple weeks after GDC, and we were like, "Yeah, this is awesome. Let's do it."
Yeah, so that's just a publishing company.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the Steam was just self-published.
Steam was self-published completely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Now you're going to get like a lot of people who really know. Not that you guys don't know what you're doing, but who've been doing this, I assume, for a while and can really push your game out to also 3 different. So now you're on 4 different platforms, which is great.
Right. Exactly.
And when's that launch happening?
Shoot, man. It's got to be the next couple months, I think. I think it's like in 2 months. I don't know exactly the date, to be honest with you. I wish I did.
Well, that's great. That's exciting.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah. So would you ever write for a game again, or is this like a one and done deal, or you might not know yet, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely consider it for sure, you know. But I guess it depends on, we'll release this book, see what happens there. Try to get into screenplays, see what happens there. So I guess there's a lot of irons in the fire in that sense. But if the graphic design was interesting enough, and the team was cool enough, then I would consider it for sure.
Well, Andrew, I think that wraps us up here. It was a pleasure talking to you. Happy for your success so far with Lost in the Wicked, and hope it kicks ass on these new platforms as well for sales. And would you like to drop where people can find more information about your game?
Yeah, sure. You can look us up on Twitter, The Lost and the Wicked. It should be right there. Steam, it's The Lost and the Wicked, and look for it on Xbox and PS Marketplace and Switch.
Awesome. And then you want to drop anything else about the weed company?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Buddy, we have a Twitter page up. We're still working on a website, and we're working on an app that we hope will be functional in the next 2 months or so. So look out for that. If you just look up Buddy Brand LLC in Twitter, you can find our Twitter page. So check that out, and we'll be sending out a lot more content and pictures and promotions, etc., to get everybody excited about it. So, yeah.
Cool. And it's a legal enterprise, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Just wanted to...
Yes.
Just wanted to triple check that before we put this on the air.
Yes, that's always smart.
Yeah, but Andrew, thank you for joining us. This was so much fun talking to you, and I would definitely be up to have you on the show again if you didn't have a bad time doing this.
Yeah, man. It was actually pretty fun.
Good.
Yeah, Graham, thanks for having me, man. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciated the conversations, and I would be more than happy to come back on.
All right, that wraps up our show. We want to thank Andrew for stopping by and being our guest for this episode. You can find out more about The Lost and the Wicked at thelostandthewicked.com. Find out more about Mudstack at mudstack.com, where you can join our Discord to interact with team members, our community of users, and learn more about what Mudstack does. Last but certainly not least, we want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.